I think I'm entitled.
You want answers!
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. When you go to church. When you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Stays up online. For the first few minutes of this video, we're just going to refer to this as the pasta fence incident. This is an incident of international renown that deserves a deep dive of its own. I've seen some really solid takes on the matter, like from Flesh Simulator, but I have yet to see a full deep dive into the topic done by anybody. And I suspect this is partially due because of the perception placed on it by the mainstream media and the federal disinformation campaign. And most people, even slightly internet inclined, probably understand that much of the narrative on this story is entirely made up to cover up the reality that is lying beneath it. First though, this is not a political attack. Politics is a psyop and I'm not here for it. That being said, let's get the necessary context out of the way. The origin of most of the email material used today is going to be from what is believed to be a Russian attack on John Podesta's email server. John Podesta is an extremely powerful Washington, D.C. figure with close ties to the Clinton family and was essentially running Hillary Clinton's 2016 election campaign. Another important figure to know is his brother named Tony Podesta that owns the Podesta Group, one of the most influential lobbying firms in America. Lobbying being, you know, that cheeky little way that ultra wealthy people can influence the entire fate of the nation and political decisions, aka bribery, but by a different name. And as we go on, we'll introduce the secondary characters in this narrative as they emerge, but it's important to recall that Hillary and Bill Clinton are implicated in this both by being close to the Podestas, but also via Hillary's appearances in the emails. That's the basics that one must understand in order to be prepared for everything coming next. And beware, this is a descent into madness unlike anything you have ever seen, and the people implicated have shaped and are shaping your life as we speak in ways you could never imagine. I'm going to do my best to avoid repeating what has been said 1,000 times, so stick with me because as these episodes continue and the deeper we go, you're going to hear things that you would have never thought were possible. Enter Edgar Madison Welch. In typical Patsy fashion, nearly no images exist of him on the entire internet, and I can confirm only a very small handful of photos that are attributed to him. Roughly the same amount of photos as you'd find candy in your hand after getting mugged on Halloween night, which is red flag number 1 for me because the prevailing narrative is that this is a fellow both chronically online and who has been lurking in quote-unquote right-leaning spaces since the birth of the internet. So like the rest of his generation, I would expect at least a couple dozen unique photos at minimum. Moreover, one of the few photos we do have of him in Lee Harvey Oswald fashion, another infamous patsy, Edgar is holding what seems to be the firearm he would later use in the Comet Ping Pong incident. I guess to make it more convenient for future news articles to write about him. Ostensibly though, in the eyes of the mainstream media, Edgar Welch was a quote-unquote far-right internet lurker who became enthralled with the story being spun in 2016 about an elite pet ring operated to some extent by Kill and Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry, a writer's error there, don't worry, he's been fired. That Bill and Hillary Clinton were operating an invite-only child trafficking ring for the most powerful. And these emails hid the truth about that behind terms like cheese, cheese pizza, hot dog, lollipop, and all sorts of other things. And obviously such a ring has no precedent in history and is lunatic level conspiracy theory. Just ignore the past 100 years of information though. As the election creeps closer, the story grows from more niche online circles like 4chan to Facebook, where man, the boomers got involved and so did the bots, and this story got relayed to a huge portion of Facebook users that unknowingly ate this story hook, line, and sinker. And for a certain period, a robust portion of Americans believed to varying degrees that the Clintons were involved in a child trafficking ring. But it wasn't merely internet posts and bots forwarding these posts to various accounts with claims of such actions that caused a growing outrage. It was the fact that there is seemingly a mountain of evidence for these claims. And this evidence was based out of a cryptic and not so cryptic set of messages uncovered from John Podesta and fellow Hillary Clinton staffers, as well as other powerful connected political allies. These emails got out, as we discussed, when Jonathan Podesta's email was hacked. And the most alarming thing that were noticed were these references to satanic rituals, child trafficking, and other demonic activities. I mean that last part very literally, as you will see later on. In theory, there should be no such references found, or anything that can even be construed as references to such activities on anyone's email. But even more alarming is that it was found coming from a host of different people's devices who had previously been rumored to engage in such activities, as well as have a sordid past, which the Clintons are no stranger to, both officially and unofficially. Also, since we were in the midst of an election, when a bunch of people see Hillary and Hillary-related emails coming out of the blue, they are seeking to confirm whatever suspicions they initially may have had about her. So initially, a lot of people took this with a grain of salt. But what started changing minds were people noticed these bizarre food references in the emails, which not only were out of place, but clearly to many not discussing the food itself. Instead, millions believe and continue to believe that references to items such as hot dogs, pizza, and cheese pizza, and pasta were actually references to various kinds of children and child trafficking. It may sound far-fetched initially, but as we read through the emails and continue on with the story beyond that, which I've had bookmarked for, we begin to understand exactly why so many people were and are suspicious of what was really going on here. The first email I think that is worth reading was written by a woman named Tamara Lozado. Most won't recognize that name. We will discuss her after the fact, and the email reads as follows. With enormous gratitude to Advanced Man Extraordinaire Haber, I am popping up again to share our excitement about the reprise of our gang's visit to the farm in Lovettsville. And I thought I'd share a couple more notes. We plan to heat the pool, so a swim is a possibility. Bonnie will be Uber service to transport Ruby, Emerson, and Maeve Lozado, 11, 9, and almost 7, so you'll have some further entertainment, and they'll be in that pool for sure. And with the forecast showing prospects of some sun and a cooler temp of lower 60s, I suggest you bring sweaters or whatever attire will enable us to use our outdoor table with a pergola overhead, so we dine al fresco and ideally not al chillo. On its own, it's not the strangest email, although certainly odd, but it is weird enough to make you question, and it also seems to suggest that something more is going on. Specifically, the references very specific ones I might add to each of the children's ages, and that they will be in the pool for the adults' entertainment. This could be a strangely worded email, but something more seems to lie beneath the surface. What I have yet heard spoken about is who Tamara is, so I sought to find out, and immediately regretted what I saw and read. The first thing to understand about Tamara is that prior to becoming Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, the role which she served when these emails were sent, she was previously a member of Senator John D. Rockefeller's Senate office. Not the OG Rockefeller, but Rockefeller IV. If you don't know why that's weird, I don't have enough time to get into them right now, but the Rockefeller family are known for many things beyond Standard Oil, including mass murder, genocide, the destruction of modern medicine, and eugenics. They are truly an evil bunch. Besides the point though, what's critical to understand is that Tamara eventually becomes his chief of staff and was Rockefeller's primary advisor on the National Commission on Children and the Pepper Commission on Healthcare. Well, there we go. An official government-level tie to children. But I find she is an interesting choice for such a position, considering the later emails we shall continue diving into, but also the history of her own children and grandchildren. Well, I should say before we hear about the children in the creepy emails about pools and quote-unquote entertainment, we actually end up seeing them on something called Evie's Crib first. This is a site I can only find archives of, but what it shows is plenty. This site I presume named after one of the children in some capacity, although the name Evelyn is not listed in the rest of the kids in that email. It houses obscene images of children and captions that belong nowhere. One such caption reads as follows. Evelyn is growing up. Soon she'll be the queen of the entire US of A. Right now, for a limited time only, you can spend time with her online, raw and uncut. Take advantage of this now, as in the future, she will have the power of life and death. What a freaking weird thing to say. Definitely not a weird thing to say at all, referring to one's daughter as raw and uncut, presumably because she's a baby, or how you should take advantage of her now. Seems a bit odd to me. Intriguingly, like we said, Evelyn's name is not listed at the pool party. Take that as you may. On this site, though, there are a number of photos that should never be online of her young, what I presume to be grandchildren. But what's even more curious is a certain post. This comes from July 23rd, 2009, 7 years prior to the alleged shot fired at Comet Ping Pong, and 6 years prior to the pool email. Tamara Lozado writes, Evie will be joined in daycare by her buddy Jack. I wanted to give you guys a chance to meet Jack by going to his blog here. Jack is owned by Ken Weber and Stephanie Copeland. A lot wrong going on here, including who this buddy is, but that's after we address the fact that, as this ancient screen cap clearly denotes, Tamara refers to this child as being owned by his parents. Children do belong to their parents. That's one of the many reasons why the government, as we can tell, needs to stay away from them. However, owned implies a different meaning when placed into the context that is slowly forming here. So let's peep who Evelyn's new friend Jack is. And here is Jack in all his glory. But Cooper, you say it's blurred. Did you make a mistake? No, I didn't. I can't show you this picture because it's a completely nude infant laying with everything hanging out, genitals partially covered by a tiny blue maple leaf. I even went and found the page on an ancient site, and although there is something written on the leaf, I cannot tell what it says. The caption, though, I do believe says more than enough for us and reads as follows. This is posted into the subsection of naked time, of which there are two. It was bath time again this weekend, which Jack celebrated in high style by slipping into the baby bath hammock, thanks Sarah C, before reuniting with the frog towel. Jack luxuriated and exfoliated in a warm soak by the kitchen window. Unrated version of this photo available only to premium subscribers, period. Winky face. This caption on top of a nude photo of your infant? Yeah, I'm not okay with that. And I think nude baby photos are weird, period. But if parents went to innocently take photos for a photo album they used to make fun of their kid 20 years later, and for the memes, I don't really care. But there is no acceptable excuse for how one takes such photos, uploads them to the internet, then suggests in a joking yet not joking manner that the uncovered baby nudes can be purchased. And evidently I'm not the only person who thought this or found this part of the rabbit hole, because there are posts up as recently as 2020 of people commenting how creepy this is, and then an anonymous user on this same thread, who I expect is Tamara, logged out of her account, saying that it's not weird, you're the weird one, don't make it weird. But what do I know, except that the woman writing thinly veiled emails, who was the chief of staff of Hillary Clinton, the broad implicated as being one of the ringleaders in this massive child slavery ring that we shall see later with DynCorp, which expands internationally, is posting in her free time photos of her naked children and offering to sell them unedited. A lot of dots, my friends, already, but as we shall see, this is merely the beginning. In fact, if you continue following this Tamara Lozado rabbit hole, you may find yourself going down a dark path, one that I refused to follow after a certain signpost, but right before stopping, I explored just a bit further and found certifiable family links for the Lozado family to Kabbalah, cannibalism, and explicit child pornographic imagery. These links are in fact so bad that the Internet Archive had to delete them from their site after they were saved by users going down this very same rabbit hole. The connections are actually really creepily direct between Lozado and these posts I'm going to read, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into them because I don't want to accidentally lead anybody to this weird corner of the internet, if I'm being honest. Fortunately though, I did not click on any of the image links, but I did click on one of the text threads for that site, and it was a conversation on sadistic desires relating to children. And to show you the sort of people this Tamara woman is connected to, I'm going to read you one post from a single user whose profile picture included violent pornographic imagery. This individual was discussing how they wanted to walk along the street, steal a woman off the street, take her back to their place, her, impregnate her, then 9 months later take the baby out of the womb, bit and side of it, and then shove that broken mess back into the whore. That last part being an exact quote. And this was the tame post on this website. Once again, I just want to add, you are the sum total of your friends and those who you are connected to. Continuing on, another email I would like to highlight is as follows. Mary and John, I think you should give notice when changing strategies which have been long in place. I immediately realized something was different by the shape of the box, and I contemplated who would be sending me something in the square-shaped box. Lo and behold, instead of pasta and wonderful sauces, it was a lovely, tempting assortment of cheeses. Yummy. I'm awaiting the return of my children and grandchildren from their holiday travels so that we can demolish them. Thank you so much. I hope you and the gang are well. I miss you both. Best wishes, Fro, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, Herb. P.S. Do you think I'll do better playing dominoes on cheese than on pasta? This email is pretty self-explanatory for why it's weird. I will get into it though in a second, but I want to emphasize this email is written by a fellow named Herb Sandler of the Sandler Foundation, who according to appropriate understanding of grammar enjoys demolishing his grandchildren, and he just can't wait for them to get back in order to do so. Honestly, what is wrong with these people? Even if there's nothing else going on, you had to have read that back to yourself and thought what it sounded like, right? Like you would have thought that sounded bad and been, let me rewrite that. And additionally, the way the pasta is referenced is not really possible, because who ships pasta to their friends in a box? And very simply, I don't think that's how that would even work. He's implying like almost a cardboard box, and he pops it open and goes, oh, there's cheese in here, not pasta with sauce. Like what? But clearly, based on what he says, it's easy for us to see that pasta and wonderful sauces have been shipped to him previously in boxes. And what on earth could he possibly mean by a tempting assortment of cheeses, considering the fact that the previous sentence about pasta was clearly not talking about pasta, in my opinion. All in all, this adds up about as well as a crackhead doing math, but like we did with the Tamara situation, let's take a closer look at who this Herbert fellow is. And like most of the people in these emails, it doesn't take much looking because Herbert is a pretty famous individual, founder of Golden West Financial along with his wife Marion, which was a savings company in California, which allegedly sought to help boost poorer folks and help them build their wealth. Well, one thing came to another, and the company that started in the 1960s had become a behemoth by the early 2000s, with assets under management reaching $124.6 billion. What's funny about Herbert, though, and his desire to help poor people, is that in mid-2006, Herbert and Marion decided they wanted to retire, but not after spending about 3 decades stacking up mountains worth of mortgage-backed securities onto their spreadsheet. Securities which they then sold to larger banks and institutions. And if you know anything about the mortgage-backed security, outside of Jeffrey Epstein, it was one of the instrumental factors in the 2008 housing market crash that destroyed the American economy permanently. So Herbert and Marion aren't exactly the kind people they claim to be, desiring to help the poor. In fact, they are a huge portion of the economic troubles we have today, and why so many can't even afford to eat. And even SNL, which is about as backward as they come, understood this and did a bid on the couple on October 4th of 2008. In 2006, the couple retired, which is convenient considering it was just before the crisis, but upon retiring, they transferred $1.3 billion to their Sandler Foundation, and I presume this is now untaxed and completely shielded money from the outside world, which is why the wealthy do foundations. And on their website for the multi-billion-dollar Sandler Foundation, which Herbert and Marion began, we see that they have a section dedicated to the safety of children, which somehow I doubt, based on your desire to demolish your own grandchildren, Herb. And this was an email I forgot about and found while searching and have basically seen no reporting on it whatsoever. And it's, in my opinion, one of the darkest and most apparent of all the emails in this case. And it reads as follows. Ari, you have a lollipop. Been meaning to thank you for being with me during my first lollipop experience. Appreciate your support and your steady presence. My only regret is that I didn't take my lollipop with me. Smile. Leia, has anyone notified you that you have a lollipop to be in the spin room at tonight's debate? Are you up for it? I'd be with you so you can tackle things not specific to the convention with you. First of all, lollipop in quotes, could you be more obvious? Second of all, lollipop is the word you choose. Anyone who reads this email knows they aren't talking about lollipops. It's dead obvious. So let me just read this description of what a lollipop is from the International Justice Mission. The word lollipop has a problem. I'm not referring to our addiction to sugary snacks, but something much darker, something more sinister. It's an unspoken epidemic that is facing our world and is destroying the lives of men, women, and children. Lollipop is a term sex offenders, predators, and used for victims of child pornography. Every 12 hours, 10,824 new images of child, also known as child images, are detected online. Every month, the Philippines receives more than 1,000 tips regarding the online exploitation of children. There is more details to this, including the lolly phenomena in anime. There's all sorts of disgusting avenues you can go down there, but lollipop is one of the most obvious terms for children ever. And in the email, they're clearly not referring to lollipops, so what's going on? And let's be honest with ourselves here. The answer is pretty obvious. The next email worth looking at is stupidly transparent, to the point this email can only be taken literally, or it's a complete misunderstanding. There is no code to misread and nothing cryptic about it. Last night was fun. Still in torture chamber. Another question. Do you want to have Feb 14 Valentine's Day dinner? Sent from my iPad. Now, you may be confused for a second why Podesta is emailing himself. Well, in reality, in relation to the suspicious emails, this is where we get introduced to Tony Podesta from. And it's Tony who's emailing John Podesta in this case. Now, Tony is a rabbit hole in and of himself, and he could be an entire video, but something worth noting about him is that in 2017, his massive lobbying firm that he began, he was forced to step down from because of investigations by the FBI. Good to know going into what we're going to be discussing next. The Podesta brothers combined are a power couple, influencing politics as a whole, but especially leftist politics and political thought. And many people take this email literally and assume he is referring to a child in a literal torture chamber, which is possible and also possibly untrue. But it's another side of Tony that really makes me and other people give credence to the thought that he could be talking about a very literal torture chamber at this moment, as what stands out about Fat Tony Podesta is his obsession and collection of disturbing art. Disturbing being an understatement. Much of it, in fact the vast majority of it, I'm not going to be able to show here because it's either porn or children, and it would completely violate every term of service, so I'm going to have to stick to the ones I can show you, and if there's something else, I'll just pull it up for you. Indeed, there's so much art, I can't show it all, let alone talk about each of them, so I'm just going to have them circulating on screen for you to admire, which seems like a bad word in this context. All right, so first one, anyone in their right mind, the red flag should be waving right now. What is that thing? It's grabbing a child and touching its butt. And If there's anything that's made me lose faith in mankind, it's that there are people online who describe this as amazing, beautiful, and evoking a powerful response. And those people I refuse to believe are alive, and instead I just want to assume, for our sake, that they're just bots. But I don't know, because some people actually think that this is art. This next piece we only know exists because of a picture of Tony Podesta's stairwell, and you can see in the distance a child wearing a diaper being lifted up by a man pretty harshly based on how much squeezing is going on. This next one, with Fat Tony in the background, many presume to be based off of the death pose of one of Dahmer's victims. Dahmer enjoyed putting his victims in what he referred to as funny or cool poses. The other angles of this statue also show that it has been decapitated, and I would be hard pressed to be convinced the making of this statue had nothing to do with the Dahmer pose, considering they matched down to the physique. I'm not sure if I'll be able to show the image of the Dahmer victim, but I'll show as much as I can. Also, Fat Tony smiling like he won the Little League Championship with the corpse art of a Dahmer victim in front of him, that is peak evil. This next one, which is just a woman lying on her back on a tiny bed, and it sort of reminds me of the Epstein massage room at his various estates. Already not something you should own. It's creepy and wrong, but this is actually a two-piece set, or many pieces really, and mind you, this is a miniature anatomical wax statue with a removable front torso, so there should be no surprise what the next image in this set is going to be. And it's this. A woman with her organs being flung out dead on some weird mattress thing. And the name of the art is Dismembered, shocker. And be honest, if your mother or father owned a piece of art glorifying the slaughter, dismemberment, and removal of organs from a woman, would you, like me, be sprinting out the door? But when a DC lobbyist influencing the fate of mankind has this sort of art in his house, one should be asking more questions and seeing what Fat Tony is really up to, because his collections don't leave a lot of room for misinterpretation. It's like the Key and Peele skit where the rapper confesses to murder on a track and everyone says it's just art. No, this isn't art. This is evil, disgusting garbage claiming to be art but serving as a confession, or really more of an obsession with what he's done or is involved in. And there is no person I know who, if they own that piece, I wouldn't immediately assume they were up to the most nefarious acts imaginable. And there are literally hundreds of pieces of art this guy owns, each of which is somehow more nefarious than the last. In fact, I had to take a break going through all of them I could find online because they are just that vile. The ones I've showed you don't even compare. That being said, we know that Podesta has at least 700 pieces of art as of 2015. Interestingly though, most of it has not been seen by the public. Indeed, when you go to the internet and you look up Podesta's art collection, you can find the National Gallery website, and that only houses 181 of what are referred to as his selected works. And many of these have also had their images removed from the website, which means they must be terrible, because there are also actual images of just porn on this National Gallery website, and yet they had to take these other things down. So what are these other things? And remember, these are on display in our country. Feel free to look it up for yourself, but the same imagery arises, that being an obsession with erotic material, including a sickening number of partially and entirely nude females, both old and young. Plenty of hints at dismemberment, and even a clear obsession with children, and these are on public display. Indeed, we do know things get pretty wild in Podesta's home, because the Washington Post reported that visitors to Podesta's house reported getting an eyeful when they walked into a bedroom at the Tony Podesta residence hung with multiple color pictures by Katie Grannon, a photographer known for documentary-style pictures of naked teenagers in their parents' suburban homes. I would like to know who these parents are and have a stern discussion with them. I would also like to know why that's allowed to take, or to print, or to have in your house, because that's porn of children. Like I said, there are more images of this kind than you can imagine, and I can't show them here. So I'm gonna go on to what I find to be the most telling image outside of the disgusting porn ones, and that's this following image. It depicts a scene where a group of children are being hunted. The children are either partially or entirely nude, and in the distance, two men are watching them menacingly, one of which is holding something black that looks like a rope to me, while the other is holding a gun. They appear to be seeking to capture the children, and the children themselves display fear by hiding from the men and keeping a distance. And if you still think these are all coincidences and art is subjective, then I presume you are of the same ilk that thinks lobotomies are healthy and everyone should get one. The imagery isn't merely suggestive though, it just directly states what's going on. You can't have bodies being ripped apart on your walls and child porn hanging next to it while sending thinly veiled emails and then write it all away. And one of the most alarming things about this Podesta case in his house is that there's an image of a little girl. It's a painting, and you can see it in a couple photos of his house, and it's a little girl who looks like she was just molested. Her clothes are all disheveled, and she's sitting there with a dead-eyed stare. Back to the emails. Let's continue with the one that I find to be the most indicative of the spiritual and, dare I say, demonic element element at play in all of this. The next email reads as follows. Dear Tony, I am so looking forward to the spirit cooking dinner at my place. Do you think you'll be able to let me know if your brother is joining? All my love, Marina Abramovic. Okay, so this is the sort of email where if you've done investigation into this topic, you've probably seen it, and if you have no idea what we're talking about, just wait. Both groups are probably catching on though that what stands out about this email is the reference to spirit cooking. And at its heart, it's a legitimate witchcraft, demonic worship ritual that was popularized by this Marina chick writing the email, who is a legitimate demon worshiper, witch, whatever you want to call her. And that's no overstatement. I'm going to play some clips of hers on screen now. Popularly, she is referred to as a performance artist, but I surmise that only the Reddit bot and mod class and people in the same activities actually believe that. One of her most infamous, quote, performance stunts was when she left some 5 items on a table and had people come up to them and do whatever they wanted to her. She was stripped, beaten, and one of the items was a gun with a bullet next to it. Someone picked up the gun, loaded it, and held it to her head. She was not killed though. And this was in the 70s. Since then, she's just tweaked out and fallen off at the same time. And now, like every witch, she's left sad and alone. So, with this spirit cooking thing, I think it's worth us giving a little bit of a refresher on what we're talking about. It is a form of cooking, so there are ingredients, but spirit cooking has a bit of a deeper meaning. It involves the mixing of blood as your base substance with fresh breast milk mixed with fresh sperm. And this blood is meant to be gathered by slashing a wound onto your middle finger and then letting the blood drip out. What's very interesting is that there are also emails of him complaining and talking to Marina about his finger not having healed yet. So we know that he did conduct spirit cooking with Marina before, which at the bare minimum is an occult ritual taking place with the highest ranking political officials in all of Washington, D.C. But back to the recipe, one is supposed to then drink this concoction or eat it. I would imagine this would be pretty chunky. But Marina tells us that one is supposed to consume it, we'll say, on what she calls earthquake nights, which could have a deeper meaning, or it could just be a night where there's an earthquake. And there's a lot of things wrong with this. The main one being that it's absolutely evil and incredibly disgusting. But we know that Abramovich takes this pretty seriously, as there are a few copies of a video from the 1990s where Marina is preparing for such an event, and it's vomit worthy. We can even see her mixing the blood and having her little servants mix the blood. What entertains me most though about this is that there are still some weirdos online who defend this behavior and claim it's not true and that it's not some sort of satanic worship, when even she admits it's satanic worship. But even more humorous is that once the emails leaked and Marina caught some flack for what she said in said emails, she told the press that it was just a funny name that they used and the menu was completely normal that night. Which obviously is shenanigans. Clearly you're trying to cover your butt. Spirit cooking has only ever and will ever mean one thing, and it's this weird devilish occult ritual that you popularized. But moreover, we know this is the recipe and we know this is what spirit cooking means because there's a copy of her original manuscript cookbook that had like 25 editions ever printed, and in it she details the man milk, the woman milk, and the blood. It's heinous. So the question then is simple. How do you feel knowing that at the bare minimum, the people who shape the future of this nation in the globe are drinking sperm mixed with blood and breast milk? Just some food for thought. The pun was not intended there though. So keeping all this in mind, we can see that clearly there is enough here to disprove the notion that the mainstream media outlets wish to push and do push, which is that Pizzagate is a baseless conspiracy theory. Because at the bare minimum, we do know that weird cryptic emails were being sent between the ultra wealthy and politically connected and powerful, and they are discussing occult rituals, more of which we will get into later. But my bad, like I'm supposed to say, there's no evidence for this conspiracy whatsoever, and we should all go back to our regular scheduled state-sponsored programming. All jokes aside, continuing with the emails, for which we are almost through, there is one that goes above and beyond the rest and seems to break the code a little bit more than the others. And it reads as follows. Did you leave a handkerchief? Hi John, the realtor found a handkerchief. Parentheses, I think it has a map that seems pizza related. Is it yours? They can send it if you want. I know you are busy, so feel free not to respond if it's not yours or you don't want it. Suzanne. Now, many people speculate here that this is one of the most direct references to the underlying messaging. What stands out to me though is that if this is a handkerchief with a stain, why not say that? Instead, Suzanne says that it's a map which appears to be pizza related. And what the heck does that even mean then? What's a map in this case? There is no word that I can find that comes close to meaning stain, is spelt with 3 letters, and could accidentally be mistyped on a keyboard. So then we must assume until we know otherwise that it is intentional, and if so, then it gives further credence to the notion that there are children being referred to here. And most people assume that map is a sort of semen-related stain, and obviously pizza-related is child-related. However, I do find that this is a good point to bring up the main spook opposition, and it's an intriguing question, and that is simply that if these are people discussing cryptic things, why would they use food terms? It's so stupid and silly. And my easy retort to that is because of what you just said. When you read something that says pizza related and talks about maps, it gives you enough plausible deniability for those unwilling to really research the case to immediately write it off as silly, because it does inherently sound silly. I'll be the first to admit. On a certain level, this sounds harmless, but we know enough about these political figures to know that they aren't harmless. So then we have to assume that these things that do stand out as strange, when you can connect a lot of these dots, have something going on. Now, yap session over, let's get back to it. But things do get weird when we see how many dots connect here, from the pizza to the pasta to the hot dogs to the cheese to the lollipops, or in Obama's case, the $65,000 worth of hot dogs that he had privately flown in. Just something to think on. Quote, subject RE, get ready for Chicago Hot Dog Friday. I think Obama spent about $65,000 of the taxpayers' money flying in pizza dogs from Chicago for a private party at the White House not long ago. Assume we are using the same channels? That is just something to think about. But a 2007 FBI document acquired by WikiLeaks would suggest otherwise, that the people who are doubting this, the spooks as we call them, are incorrect, and that we should be reading into cryptic text and messaging and symbols. There's a document detailing the symbols and methods of communication used by pedophiles networks to show these sorts of activities they enjoy. For instance, the following symbols for, quote, boy lovers, or hearts like these for, quote, girl lovers, or the following for, quote, child lovers, or this one, which is the online logo for an organization that seeks to decriminalize rape, which is what it is when you attempt a quote-unquote romantic relationship with a child. Because I don't care what many try and say today, there is no such thing as a child's consent to such matters. But with this, we have a clear through line that these groups dealing in children will use bizarre symbols for their purposes. But it does go further than just this. This 2007 FBI document, which was later leaked, also reveals some of the methods used by pedophiles for getting this information across. And this information comes from pedos who were later caught and searched, and from items that were found on them or in their homes. So what you're telling me then is there are nefarious groups and organizations engaged in trafficking and exploitation of children who will use cryptic forms of communication that you might not notice and might seem silly, and that it's not just a conspiracy theory. Oh, got it. Also worth mentioning, if this was utilized as far back as 2007, which was 18 years ago, side note, feel old yet? Then imagine how many more symbols and technologies are being used today for covert communications. It's not like they're stuck in the dark ages. At this rate, you probably know one, whether or not you are aware of it. And way back when I did a video on what was likely a trafficking ring operated out of a diner in Grand Rapids, there was a point where we pulled out the map and there were countless offenders in the city, 5 times the national average, a huge portion of which were child offenders, to the point where you had a neighbor within a few doors that was one. So it's highly probable that this same sort of activity is going on next door or a few blocks down the street. Now, speaking of down the street, let's connect some dots. What we haven't discussed about the emails is that so many of them reference one place, that being Comet Ping Pong. Comet Ping Pong is a pizza place that has ping pong, and at the surface is no more than that. It's in Washington, D.C., and is run by a fellow who I refuse to call a man named James Alefantis. Ostensibly, Alefantis is a local pizza shop owner, as well as an art gallery owner and founder of several other restaurants. He became infamous in 2016 when, according solely to official narratives, a man named Edgar Madison Welch entered his humble ping pong pizza shop and claimed he was going to save the children from the basement, where he believed they were hidden for unknown reasons. More on that whole story later though. But for most, that's the pinnacle of James Alefantis in this story. He owned the shop that was unfortunately the scene of a ridiculous conspiracy theory, which is how everyone sounds to me when they use that term. But what we get out of this is that everyone should feel really bad for this Alefantis guy and look no further. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is nowhere near where the story begins or ends for James Alefantis. The more astute might notice some things that are off about him. Firstly, for a pizza shop owner, he has some incredibly powerful friends. Viewing his Instagram, we find photos of personal letters from Hillary Clinton, photos from campaign rallies, photos of Obama playing ping pong with a child, presumably taken by Alefantis, followed by a series of images which show Alefantis and Podesta, including one where Alefantis is holding a pizza pool floaty with, oh yeah, of all things, a creepy silhouette of a female behind the two of them. But that is simply the beginning. This allegedly humble pizza shop owner has an Instagram full of depraved crap. I'm going to warn you, there is an archive of it online, if you can find it, from before James privated it in the days after the scandal erupted, and on there you will find literal graphic images, like actual on his Instagram, as well as people engaged in various sexual acts on pizza or utilizing pizza. His Instagram also then contains weird, creepy, and in some cases downright disturbing photos of children, like the one of Obama playing ping pong with a child in the White House while people watch in what looks like some weird basement. But far more questionable is the photo of a little girl James alleges to be his niece, with the top half of her sprawled out on top of a ping pong table that he has taped her hands to. Mind you, this girl, her face is blurred, but she's no more than 5 years old, if that. And I'm not sure how anyone can defend that it's harmless play, as I've seen posted online, especially considering the caption is #chickenlover, which is seen several times across his Instagram and is an unmistakable sign of something being awry, considering it's a known term for acts and tendencies. And combining that with naked photos of males and females, some of which I believe are him, with pizza covering their genitals, one has to wonder many things. One, how did he not get banned from Instagram for this? And two, and much more importantly, why is this guy posting this? A guy who's close friends with seemingly everyone connected to these emails? And he's the guy who owns the restaurant that all these people rumored to be tied up in a deplorable ring are all referencing as the best pizza joint in the spot to visit? I have never nor will ever believe in coincidences. There's a rhyme and a reason to all things. So now with so many tally marks in favor of organized child trafficking and exploitation cult, one has to wonder what's going on here. And I'll theorize more later because I will remain fact focused. But without even diving into his Instagram posts, which I can't show on here so we can't dive into, we should take a gander though at his profile picture, which appears to be a statue of a man from long, long ago. And that would be correct, but it's not just any man. Reverse image searching, one may find that it's actually a statue of Antinous. And Antinous, I didn't know and you might not know, is the little boy that essentially served as Hadrian's slave. Historians, for whatever reason, like to call him Hadrian's lover, but considering they met when Antinous was 12, I'm not going to stoop so low as them, as that would be implying consent could be given, which, as we've been over, children cannot give consent for such acts. So the short used the death of this little boy and created an entirely new cult around his dead little boy that he raped for almost a decade. And in this cult, Hadrian made Antinous a quote-unquote god. And I'll just let you fill in the blanks on how you think this cult worshipped their quote god. Many historians also consider the statues and busts made of Antinous some of the best examples of ancient pederasty. Unsurprisingly, because many of the statues have his schlong out and he has a strange abusive air to him, like he's not totally there in his own mind, and it's pretty effeminate seeming in a lot of these. But if you're curious what I mean by that, look him up sometime, although be wary because it's technically an ancient form of child pornography, as many of them were made specifically for Hadrian's pleasure, with one of the most well-known and intact pieces being found in the remnants of Hadrian's estate. And as one historian notes, whoever made most of these statues depicted Antinous at the age he met and began being by Hadrian, which would have been done at Hadrian's bequest, which then pings these statues at roughly the age of 12 or 13 or 14, and we know this because in ancient CP making customs, when depicting a younger boy, you would do so, quote, without pubic hair and with carefully represented groin tissue. And most of the material we have on this fellow fits just that pattern. One of the many reasons Antinous statues are considered a staple in studying ancient food. This seems like the one Roman figure you wouldn't want to have as your profile picture when being heavily suspected and investigated for dealing in children and handing them out to wealthy and powerful individuals who come to you to them, or for material about that activity. And you know exactly the same situation that happened to the guy we just discussed in your profile picture. Definitely just a coincidence though, right guys? All these in mind, the number of similarities I'm noticing between Epstein and Alefantis is disturbing. The child infatuation, erotic imagery for the public to see, powerful connections to politicians and the most wealthy people in America, something else is going on here. And we get another sign of what that something else may be in a GQ magazine 2012 edition that cites the 50 most powerful people in Washington. And if you had to guess, in a place where senators, representatives, lobbyists, billionaires, and even the president resides, who do you think made it onto that list, coming in at number 49? You guessed it, our humble pizza purveyor, James Alefantis. So then what makes him so powerful if he only owns a small handful of restaurants and what is referred to as a small art gallery? And the only clear sign as to what that power could be for me is his obvious connection to the most powerful people in Washington, DC and in America. For those spooks though in the comments, before writing something vaguely pretentious and annoying, be helpful. Find me another reason he's on that list if he owns just a few restaurants and a small art gallery. I bet you can't. So speaking of powerful people in Washington, another source for Alefantis' power would be his well-known physical relationship and romantic relationship with a man, and not just any man, but David Brock, the founder of what people and organizations both on the left and right consider to be a hard left media watchdog organization named Media Matters. The purpose of this organization ostensibly is to monitor what they refer to as false narratives coming from the right-leaning news media sources, as well as make some of their own content. And it's obviously not very difficult to see, looking at Snopes and other mainstream media and fact checkers, that it's pretty common for these organizations to be used to block or reduce the spread of news stories that harm your side's candidates. It's sort of like shooting out flares in a fighter jet when a heat-seeking missile is launched at you. The missile tracks onto the other heat sources and then just flies away. It's the same thing here, except Media Matters publishes articles or influences others to publish articles to throw investigators off the scent. So suffice it to say, it's fair to suggest that it had a pretty considerable role to play in the current perspective that many have on the Gate. That being that it is a far-right conspiracy theory meant to harm Hillary Clinton's campaign. But let's take a closer look at Media Matters and see if it too has a trail of corruption like so many discussed today. And even Wikipedia, of all places, has to admit something is off at least slightly considering the Media Matters institution, because they are currently being sued for publishing defaming and fake media, or being investigated by the Attorney General of Texas for potentially fraudulent activity, and to ensure that the public has not been deceived. And alongside him, the Missouri Attorney General is doing the same. So suffice it to say, Media Matters is not exactly the creme de la creme, but is nonetheless an organization that does have influence, releasing studies on other orgs and sort of acting like a stamp of approval for what is liked and disliked and approved and disproved, and what we should consider news and not news. And funny enough, funding for this organization has come from other hugely powerful politicians and wealthy individuals and groups, like George Soros, everyone's favorite economy destroyer, or Bill Clinton, who actually gave them the office space to start the organization. Wow, how generous. And guess where that office space was located? In another think tank known as the Center for American Progress, which think tanks are total baloney, but that's neither here nor there right now. The important thing to know is that one specific fellow started that other think tank, and his name is John Podesta, the lad whose name appears thousands of times in the assumedly child-related emails, and the brother of the dude who has the CP art. So now with Bill and Hillary and the Podestas appearing once more, seems like in a very long way, we have a circle of familiar faces and names forming. And it's a circle I certainly believe is worth looking more into, although undoubtedly the more you look, the more you will find that the circle continues to expand. But as for Alefantis, you don't even have to look that hard to know this guy is up to no good. He posts image of selling children on his Instagram, so if that doesn't warrant an investigation, nothing will. Back to the pizza place itself though, Comet Ping Pong, it should serve as no surprise that the weirdness is not kept merely to the confines of Alefantis Instagram. There are all sorts of things wrong with this joint. Normally I don't get too much into symbology because it's often full of schizo posting, unless it's just dead obvious, but in this case, it really is, and there's too much at play, especially considering the FBI released all the PDF file imagery we need to start making connections, and showed us that even shapes which share similarity to the ones they gave can be related. So I'll go rapid fire for this as best I can. The menus in Comet Ping Pong show 2 ping pong paddles, and initially this is nothing to be concerned with in and of itself, but upon a second glance, they heavily resemble the child lover image from the FBI to be on the lookout for, or to be on the lookout for anything related or similar. But that's by far the least disturbing and incriminating thing here. The murals of Comet Ping Pong rival Tony Podesta's art for weirdness, depicting adults, most of whom are wearing no clothes, parading children and or the heads of children around, along with bizarre creatures enclosed in an embrace in the background. Not sure how you're supposed to play ping pong looking at that, but I will add that one of these humanoids appears to be wearing a crown. Make of that power dynamic what you shall. The bathrooms are also littered in pornographic graffiti, which was either a stylistic choice from Alefantis, and he had it created this way, or he just left it up because he liked it. The musical acts that Comet Pizza advertises for and hosts at their venue also go beyond what one might anticipate if this were merely some random theory. For instance, one of the groups that performs in Comet Pizza is named Heavy Breathing, and the other is named Stains. So we are already not off to a great start here, as it's not exactly the people I would normally anticipate to be performing at a pizza joint. But it goes further. In one of these songs, there is a scene where 2 characters discuss, you guessed it, the song is by Heavy Breathing and it's named I Know Love. The music video somehow on YouTube contains direct imagery of a nude female and other disgusting and perverted imagery, as well as this little gem of dialogue. The character on the left is named Bram72. Hey, do you ever go to house shows? And on the right, the character Majestic Ape 29 says, huh? Gross, ... What are you, a There's actually a whole rabbit hole where people believe this majestic ape fellow is actually James Alefantis, but we don't have that sort of time to go down there. Comment if you're interested in that. Nonetheless, let's go further to the other band named Stains. They have a song named Land of La La that has plenty of sexual material of its own and the thematic design of an MK Ultra victim's nightmares, but the astute noticed something I cannot take credit for because I can't make it through the video without becoming ill. But what others who did make it through noticed is that a symbol on this box in the background directly resembles the one the FBI warned us means boy lover and tells us to be on the lookout for any variant of it, and it appears not only once in this video but can be seen throughout the entirety of the video at various intervals. Hard to convince me that something that looks so similar was purely coincidental, but let's move on. The evidence goes well beyond the images alone. There's a video that implies the darkest things imaginable are taking place at Comet Ping Pong or nearby. Uploaded in the early days of YouTube, March 26 of 2007, this video is entitled Ping Pong in a Public Place, with just under 360,000 views as of the time of writing. It is critically underwatched. Be forewarned, you are only going to see two blokes playing ping pong and cars driving by, but it's not what you see that raises hairs. Instead, it's what you hear. Listen closely. Not typically the place you'd expect to find children at night. Yes, this is a pizza joint, but it's also a bar, so the vast majority of the customers are drinking. So a child being there at night is kind of odd in and of itself, especially outside, seemingly alone. Well, or I should say without parents. But a child being there and begging for help is an entirely different kind of sign. There is no other way to take it. These are evidently screams of fear, a child begging for help, and at one point she says what I think is, "Daddy, help me." But if I were to wager, no one came to save her. But what makes this even more disturbing is that I have a lot of evidence that suggests that there are missing children directly connected to this place and to the people involved, but we will get into that later. As of now though, this is just another sign that something afoul is running amok. And if this really is what we suspect we just heard on that camera, then God, please hold that child near to you and your son Jesus for all time. Amen. Intriguingly, the original uploader of this video seems to either know what he has or be completely unaware, because the titling is only about the ping pong, but the hundreds if not thousands of comments across each version on the internet all reference the screaming. It certainly is quiet, but it's not that quiet where if you posted this to the internet and you were watching it through, it's not like you wouldn't notice, it's still clearly there. This is also the video that has been known to get taken down on certain occasions, therefore the titling may be a method of obfuscating anyone who may wish to have it removed. So I'm glad we've made another archive of it online here for posterity's sake. But even stranger and somewhat ironic is that there's another restaurant vaguely connected about a block down from Comet Pizza that also sells pizza, which does have a basement, and the restaurant's name is Besta Pizza and has a logo that nearly identically matches some of the symbols that are given to us from the FBI. A logo that this Besta Pizza changed right when the gate first broke. And there's also another joint named Beyond Borders across the street that matches almost exactly that of the Girl Lover logo from the FBI. Just worth note. It's hard to convince me that anyone can believe all these are coincidences, so I have a magnificent piece of Riverside property I would just really like to sell you in the nether. Boy, I could cook on Comet Ping Pong for hours, from the rumors and images of a basement freezer to the countless other posts we didn't get to, but there is nonetheless something else we need to discuss so we can introduce the next topic, which will be the alleged shooting, as well as just keep the video moving. So what we first must cover are the rumors of a server being hosted from a back room in Comet Ping Pong, or what one might suspect are rumors until we learn a little bit more. To most, these servers are complete speculation and are denied by the mainstream media or not even brought up, but as we discuss later with Edgar, it is allegedly one of the things that motivated him to conduct the quote-unquote shooting. So there's a lot riding on this part of the story, and it's very interesting what happens, but I'll quit the yap. This begins with the disturbing account of a single man who who in the wake of the gate and the emails breaking, decided to take it upon himself to pry open the case a bit further for us to see what we could get at. And while poking around the Comet Pizza website, he stumbled into what essentially amounts to the back rooms. It was this bizarre webpage that had a chart which listed a series of files, their sizes most of which appear to be very large, video size large, the date, the tag, a section to input the DL key or download key I presume, and a button to download. Now as you can see from the screen, this technically inclined individual has uncovered a members private area on the Comet Ping Pong site, and in no world should there even be a private members area on a pizza website. But brushing that aside for a moment, the notion that there are dozens of encrypted video-sized files hosted on the Comet Pizza Ping Pong website makes no sense. And rather humorously, I heard one individual try and write it away as security camera footage, but one, then it would have been labeled for the camera and the date, and two, it wouldn't be hosted on the website with encryption keys. That's so silly. So what else could be going on here then? Except the absolute worst things possible, and much like Epstein, everything that is alleged to have gone on is being recorded and perhaps is even out there to be downloaded by those in the know for their viewing pleasure. Furthermore, the site is /was evidently being monitored because the following day the password was changed and new obstacles were placed to prevent anyone from seeing this. So for us today, the site's page no longer exists when you look up Comet Pizza online, and when you look at the Wayback Machine, the best we can get is a password protected page. This one, as far as we are aware, we can't even find today. All of this to say that someone is clearly actively involved to keep this hidden. For now though, we have to take a different turn, so please keep this server and this strange, bizarre, download-filled website in mind. When we left off last episode, we had just discussed the bizarre server one user had uncovered and tapped into. And unsurprisingly, according to his testimony, it was filled with the sorts of things you can imagine. But what is a bit more surprising is that in this same interview that you can't find online almost anywhere, our valiant friend reports that in the coming days, problems began to emerge for him and his family. Now, if you haven't seen the first episode, I'd recommend checking that out first, but part 2 is also still enjoyable as a standalone. So what then did he experience after exploring the Comet Ping Pong servers? The first strange happening for our friend was that a few days after cracking into the servers, while he was in his office working, and his son was in the other room towards the front of the house, he began hearing through his door his son yelling for him. And the layout of the house is shotgun style, he explains, so that you can see straight out to the front door from the hallway of his office. And so when he heard the child screaming for him and he went into the hallway and he saw a man peering in through the front glass of his door, he was pretty caught off guard. The man quickly made eye contact with our friend and then he ran. This is obviously immensely creepy. This man's child and house were being scouted by a strange man. Could it have just been an intruder? Perhaps, but given the context and the timing, I find that doubtful. Even stranger though is that our friend will report just a few days after this incident that one of his work trucks was badly damaged, seemingly having been run into by another car. The perpetrator of this incident also fled and was never found. And this was quite the shift for a man who just a few weeks prior could never have anticipated any of this happening. But based on the interview, what seemed to catch him most off guard was that when he tried reporting these incidences to the police, like what he had found on the Comet Ping Pong server, the police completely ignored him. He would call, report it to the officer, then get transferred to another officer, then to another, then to a detective, then to another, and then the phone call would die, or they just wouldn't pick up the phone. And this same pattern occurred not over just a couple of days, but over several weeks of trying to get this information to the police. They just simply wouldn't take it. And from what I can ascertain, no report was ever filed on the police's end, showing us that if we weren't sure already, this corruption certainly does run deep. Thankfully though, there is a bit of a positive side to this story. The man who snuck behind Comet Ping Pong's firewalls is still active on Twitter, meaning he most likely isn't dead, although these days we can't be sure for certain. But it's the little wins that keep us going, you guys. 2:46 a.m. and I'm editing this video, and I realized when I watched through the interview a little bit of it again with this guy, he talks about how someone was arrested by the police that was in his bushes in a full ghillie suit and a mask, watching his house and his family. And as it turns out, that's actually true. There's an article to this, but I wanted to add that in here because we have more evidence that this guy was actually under duress by somebody or some organization. Okay, so now we're gonna go all the way back to the guy that we started this video series talking about, a man named Edgar Madison Welch. On December 4th of 2016, Edgar, allegedly knowing some of this information that we've discussed about the servers and about the emails, was incredibly convinced that Comet Ping Pong was the epicenter of the Clinton family spearheaded Washington, D.C. ring. Edgar was also, for some strange reason, under the impression that there was a basement to Comet Pizza, for which there is not, although at the time there was theories circulating about a basement because Alefantis hints at a basement by showing an unfinished room and a hole being dug with a ping pong table in the background, effectively baiting a proverbial hook. but it was pretty commonly understood and debunked among the more conspiratorial side of the internet that the basement alluded to was not at Comet Ping Pong, but rather another place known as the Pegasus Museum. But that, you guys, is a rabbit hole for later. But I wanted to be clear that it wasn't really suspected that there was a basement of Comet Ping Pong, and no one who wasn't a spook thought that the kids were actually down in the basement of this place. So now, back to Edgar. I want to preface that the following narrative I'm going to tell a short bit of is solely from the mainstream media. That being that Edgar Madison Welch had been a serious follower of the pizza incident findings and was deeply entranced in the idea of the elite pedo ring being run out of Comet Pizza, which is already a red flag because, as discussed, most didn't think it was literally being run out of Comet Pizza, as in there weren't children there. In spite of that fact, though, we were told he was reading all the emails and that he understood what was happening to a pretty high level. And so, Edgar drove from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., parked outside of Comet Pizza, and then was arrested an undetermined amount of time later, which I guess to be around 15 to 30 minutes. We aren't really certain exactly of the time, but that's about all we really know. Now, in the comments, I'm sure you're saying, but Cooper, it was a mass shooting. Like 10,000 people lost their lives, and it's a national tragedy, and that's why we have a National Ping Pong Day. I mean, I'm joking, obviously. If you're watching part 2 of this video, you likely know better than that. Although it is worth noting that many people I've had this conversation with are under the impression that a mass casualty event did occur that day. And that is in large part due to the mainstream media and slop tubers. But something even more bizarre to me than that, because it's about what I expect from the internet, is that the narrative around that day has become solidified even deeper than just the superficial level. I sat in a class one time where the professor and students actually thought people were shot and died, and that it was all just crazy, deranged Trump supporters engaging in a conspiracy theory. Besides the point, I don't want to yap too much. However, it's hard to blame people who believe Pizzagate was just a conspiracy entirely for a number of reasons. The main one being that, depending on what source you read, you are going to get a different account. Some will say that there were 3 shots fired, some will say 1, and as a later eyewitness will state there were no shots fired at all. However, what all the sources left and right tend to agree on is that supposedly Edgar brought in his Colt-branded AR-15 into the Ping Pong Pizzeria, and in so doing scared away all the customers. At which point, he walked around the restaurant, opened some doors, found nothing, until eventually, however, it is claimed that Edgar found a locked door where Alefantis later tells us it's just a coat room, which one would ask why your employee's coat closet is locked, but questions for another time, which is what went through Edgar's mind, we are told, as he assumed that the secret locked door hidden in the back must be the one that leads to the basement and or has the children right behind it. And so a man who claimed to be on the hunt for abducted children shot through said locked door, in so doing striking 3 children who would later succumb to their wounds. Now, the last part is obviously false, but he did, however, manage to shoot through the thick wooden door from such a high angle that the bullet managed to fly straight through the wooden door and bury itself in the server resting obscured in the back of the room. But first of all, why is there a server in a pizza place anyway? And I presume this is the one that hosted the encrypted files, which we are told from the person who hacked into the server were hiding CP and CP related materials. Just a little point for reference. But what's most intriguing to me is that of all places this bullet could have landed, after going through the door where a guy doesn't know it's even in there, it flies through the top of this server and embeds itself in the hard drives. Yeah, okay, that's not sus. The one bullet lands exactly where the evidence is believed to be stored. The evidence that our computer friend from earlier managed to grab from off the website before it was buried behind new secret measures and firewalls. The same information that was hidden on the drives that our buddy here reported to the police that they then wouldn't take. The same information that Edgar supposedly saw just a short while before the shooting, and instead of using it to help bring down the ring, he drives hundreds of miles to destroy. All the while, from what I can tell, leaving no bullet hole in the door he supposedly shot through. For a guy who doesn't believe in coincidences like myself, that seems about 500 degrees beyond the realm of possibility, and way more like something was staged. And maybe old Eddie here was part of something larger. But to recap, let's look at it from the other side so we can better make the argument that Edgar is a patsy. If I were James Alefantis, who I think it's worth noting, his name is almost an exact anagram for the French phrase on screen now that I won't be saying, and I were, in theory, in charge of managing a giant trafficking and ring of children, with the server containing the explicit materials and participant info being run out of my pizza shop, and it was just hacked by a random guy who's now making reports about it to the police, I would really want something to happen to that evidence, but obviously I can't destroy it because that makes me look guilty. So the best thing that could happen for me would be to have someone walk in, take a pot shot at the hard drive, thereby destroying all of the evidence, which takes all the attention off me, destroys the story's credibility, while simultaneously making this entire thing seem like a psychotic, deranged conspiracy Because after all, I only sell pizza, right? That's exactly right. In fact, after this, the public will then recognize me as the victim of what? Some crazy online conspiracy. And forever and ever, the term Pizzagate will be labeled an alt-right conspiracy theory. And it's low-key genius because it worked. Bro even got a GoFundMe that got like 30 grand out of this, just a little food for thought. It's obvious at this point when you really take a second glance that something is up, but when you have the entire establishment media and most of social media telling you otherwise, most people aren't going to look any further than that, when in reality, the literature says exactly what's going on. And so that's basically how this story has sat until now, outside of a few people online who have really dove into it. But prepare yourself, because we're about to go somewhere where I don't believe anyone else has gone yet, and there really is no coming back. It should be fairly obvious at this point that Edgar Welch is likely to be a patsy, and as we've seen over the past few centuries, those come in many flavors: desperation, addiction, programming like MKUltra, and a host of other options. But almost always what we see are two common traits for a patsy. The first are really bizarre family members with creepy connections to the government that don't make sense but seem too strange to ignore, which Edgar's lineage meets with flying colors, or top secret colors one could say. And the second is a bit more difficult to explain, so first, there's an elephant in the room that I want to address, which should help to make this second patsy tradition make more sense. When I started diving into Edgar and his family, I asked myself if there was any chance we could settle this whole debate about the gate and just ask the man himself what happened that day. And so I started looking Edgar up, and the vaguest memory sparked in my mind upon doing so, about something I had heard many months back. It was a case involving Edgar, and it happened on January 4th of this very year, in fact. According to the official narrative, Edgar was traveling down the road outside of Kannapolis, North Carolina around 10 p.m. when a police officer claims to have recognized the vehicle Edgar was driving, and based on his own testimony, believes that he just knew deep inside that this incredibly common vehicle was Edgar's, and that Edgar must be up to no good, and that Edgar also had warrants. And this officer was so good, according to all the articles I've read, he didn't even need to run the plates, as that is not mentioned as happening anywhere, nor was Edgar speeding. So I think a good lawyer could find some wiggle room in there. So as Edgar slows down, suddenly two other cops show up on the scene. It's not specified if the other officer called for backup though. Once again, the report isn't public, but the police did give a statement and some local articles wrote on it, and I want you guys to have the best information and to be aware where I'm pulling this from. So Edgar gets pulled over and comes to a polite stop. One of the feds exits his vehicle and walks over to the driver's side door, only to see, lo and behold, Edgar's not the one driving. And now at this point, the officer probably should have realized he just made an illegal stop. But by happenstance, Edgar is in the front passenger seat. And at this point, the cop walks up to the door to arrest Edgar, and in the middle of their interaction, Edgar pulls out a gun he had hidden in his shirt and starts pointing it out the door and waving it around. The cops in their own reports tried to tell him to stop, but it doesn't seem like they did for very long, because shortly thereafter, the group of officers unloaded into Edgar, and as is popular slang, most especially in American hoods, they turned him into Swiss cheese. Interestingly, there was not one but two other passengers in the car, including the mysterious driver, which is where things in my mind get really bizarre if they weren't already. We have no idea who these passengers were, and no reporting has come from them, which I imagine you would at least make a post, maybe even on social media, after your friend was murdered right before your eyes. Or I dare say they should have at least been interviewed by the media, but there's none of that. But also, I thought it was Edgar's car and that's why the stop was initiated. But then why isn't he the one driving? Even stranger, the police briefing on their Facebook, all of the passengers were still in the vehicle when the shooting took place. So presuming one of these cops is by the window where Edgar is sitting, and another one is probably in front of the front windshield, and the third one, who was not one of the officers to shoot, is also standing there, it's sort of incredible that none of the people but Edgar there got hit by a bullet. Especially because cops aren't known, especially in the States, for sparing bullets when they feel under threat. And so all of this is beginning to sound a lot more like an execution than a traffic stop gone bad. But most importantly to me, with this act, the police filled patsy tradition number 2 right on in, killing the only actual witness to the events of that day outside of Comet Pizza, leaving us with a story that doesn't hold up very well under scrutiny. Something about this event was so bizarre to me. I tried to find whatever I could and see if I could get in contact with someone who might have access to the footage, because as you might notice, there's going to be basically zero footage of this online, except for one angle from one news report that shows the car from the other side of the street. So basically completely useless for our purposes. But what I could notice from this footage is that there's a shop right next door that I would expect to have cameras pointing in the general direction of the incident in the car. And so I called the shop and I left them a message. And today, the day I recorded this audio, I got a call back from them when I was in the gym. Now, I didn't have any access to something to record the call, but I took a couple of notes. When we first got on the phone, they referred to me as Officer Edgar, which doesn't make any sense. And when I told them I wasn't a cop, they started getting very angry and asking why I was calling them and why I was investigating what had happened on that specific date. And that was my cue that something was wrong. The call didn't last much longer than that. They basically told me, goodbye, we don't have anything for you, and then ended the call. So make of that what you will. What most are unaware of is that outside of Edgar, there is no one else in the entire world, to our knowledge, who has any idea what happened inside of the restaurant that day, as the cameras outside of the restaurant were faced the wrong way, and the cameras inside the restaurant were either unplugged or facing the wrong way. So there is no video evidence of what transpired. But don't worry, all the cameras were in working order the next day, so everything's fine. Additionally, Edgar himself had been streaming some of the car ride from DC to North Carolina, where he was discussing his motives for doing this and wanting to protect his daughters, which makes about exactly the sense you would expect it to for the mainstream media narrative. But if we look a little bit deeper, if there is this guy who wants to spread the word and show that there are children inside of Comet Pizza, why wouldn't he have streamed his actual time inside of Comet Pizza, or at the very least recorded it? After all, if you wanted to prove that there were actually kids in there and have people believe you, that would have been the way to do it. And I tell you, having this footage would help us out a lot, because the story about what happened inside Comet is utterly bizarre, and to this day, we still don't actually know what transpired. First of all, I'm not able to pin anything down about just how many shots Edgar fired, which seems improbable to me because, you know, within 2 to 3 minutes of Edgar getting out of his car, dozens of police officers were already on the scene. It's not suspicious at all. And these officers arriving on scene would have been just around the same time as the people inside were leaving the premises. So you have dozens of eyewitnesses at this point. And among these eyewitnesses was one man who stayed in the restaurant longer than others, named Sharif Silmi, who was present playing ping pong with his wife as Edgar walked into Comet Ping Pong. And Sharif's account is incredibly important to us. Since he remained inside of the restaurant for longer, he saw much more than others. Sharif makes it clear that while he's playing ping pong, he sees Edgar walking around and basically bothering nobody, just there, you know? He seemed to just be searching for something or looking for a place to be. Up to nothing in particular, just walking around checking doors. But the weird thing that Sharif did notice and archive in 3 separate tweets was that Edgar had walked in with not a rifle, but a shotgun, which is a pretty big difference from the story that we have been told, for a reason we'll get into in 1 second. First though, an AR and a shotgun are not typically very difficult to distinguish from one another, as they're very different looking guns. But even more important, the bullet hole that enters into the server and destroys the hard drive absolutely belongs to a rifle based on the fact that it is just one hole, rather than a shotgun, which is what Edgar, according to Sharif, the eyewitness, and apparently the only eyewitness to the events, stated that Edgar was using. Something you absolutely must keep in mind. And while playing ping pong and noticing that Edgar was carrying a shotgun inside the restaurant, Sharif evidently had enough time to spot the difference and then catalog the scene as he watched Edgar head to the back of the restaurant, where he states that, quote, "I think he was trying to stash the shotgun in the back to use later on." Which brings up several questions. 1, we get this story of an irate Edgar with a rifle bursting into Comet Ping Pong in the stories from the media, but oddly enough, absolutely nowhere is a shotgun mentioned in the story. And question 2 is that if Edgar entered the store so calmly that people didn't immediately run out when they noticed the guy with the gun trying to shoot it up, then what really was happening in there? And if Edgar truly was stashing a gun for later, then what was the real intention he had for that day? Or another way of saying that is, what was the actual plan he had been given? Moreover, Sharif has another critical interaction via the interwebs for us that gives us another key detail. And this interaction occurs with several journalists over Twitter who ask him for his permission to use his information and pictures in their articles, one of whom is named Phoebe, who worked for the Washington Post, and still does, meaning she and a major news organization were fully aware of what appears to be the only known eyewitness to the events and what he is saying, and yet the Washington Post and Phoebe would go on to ignore Sharif's sightings and just take his photos and publish the exact same stories that everyone else was about a crazy man with an AR. And it should go without saying, but what's missing from these reports is the reference to the shotgun that Edgar had. And that's just too weird for me. I'm not one to disparage eyewitnesses, and this man is apparently the only one, and so clearly from what he's telling us, He watched it happen, and the shotgun was in the building and Edgar was seen stashing it in his own words. So then why leave it out of basically all of the reports except for a very select few? And interestingly, even the police report, which does include the shotgun, does it in a really weird manner, because unlike the rifle and the pistol that Edgar supposedly had with him, they don't give a brand or caliber for the shotgun. It just says shotgun and some ammo. Call me crazy, but I think the shotgun in this testimony from Sharif may be hiding a lot more than we may ever know. It's worth noting though who Sharif is, because once again, he's another highly connected DC attorney, and he owns his own practice. Just something to put out there. But above all, what stands out to me is that Sharif, in his own reporting, heard not 3 shots, not 1 shot, but 0 shots ring out in the store, and he didn't see any either. So how then did the guy that was in the store not hear the shots ring out? Also, it appears that this story of shots ringing out didn't start until later when mainstream media started publishing stories about it in the following hours. Mull that one around for you. Alright, so now more history on Edgar, a man who, despite growing up in the age and generation of share everything online, has merely a small handful of verified photos of himself online, which is the beginning, or really the continuation, of a long trend of patsy traditions that this fellow embodies. Before I get ahead of myself though, Edgar was born on April the 29th of 1988 in North Carolina. He has a profile on something called couchsurfing.com that references having spent time living in Haiti, although that time is completely unaccounted for anywhere else. And the only other real lead that we get on what he did with his time from womb to comet is that when looking up his name with nothing pizza related, you're going to find that he has an IMDb page and that he has acting, producing, and writing credits. And all of the productions he was involved in are atrocious. I had to actively seek out one of his projects that he was on, entitled The Mill, and here's a clip from that for you.
Hey there, stud muffin.
My name's Ralph.
How are you doing, baby?
Madison, I told you I couldn't sell any more beer. I almost got in trouble last time.
Oh, honey, no one's gonna find out. I won't tell if you won't tell. It'll be our little secret.
No more beer.
How much, dumb? Bring it up.
$6.14 with the cheer wine.
But it should hit you like the bully in a 1990s film that the guy we are slowly making the case for being a patsy has a background in theater and acting, which seems like a mighty convenient little fact. Indeed, I did my best, but there, to my knowledge, is nothing else we can learn about Edgar, so let's take a look then at the next best thing, that being who he's related to, namely who his parents are. Disclaimer, this is all readily available information. That being said, I'm not going to include the link to the website I found, but sifting through IMDb, I found that Edgar's father's name is Harry Welch Jr., and he owns what is at face value a production company. I can't mess with you. The name of this production company, Forever Young Productions, which Forever Young is a well-known reference to what happens when a child dies young, because they are then forever young in popular conception as they never got a chance to grow old. What an incredibly bizarre thing based on the situation we're discussing, but let's continue. When I found Edgar's dad's bio online, I thought at first that this might be useless, but in fact it was a gold mine for intel. Never in my now year plus of making these investigative YouTube videos have I seen such a readily available chunk of information for us just sitting there, which as we'll continue, might be a sign to be suspicious about. So reviewing Harry's biography, we're going to learn a lot. First is that he introduces his family members where we find Edgar Madison's name along with his siblings, therefore we know we are looking at the correct guy. Continuing on, Harry discusses how he had been in broadcasting for 25 years, which sounds fishy because broadcasting is incredibly vague, and 25 years leaves about a decade unknown about him since this picture paints him somewhere in his 60s in my opinion. And as I was writing this, I saw a link that I had missed, and it answers a lot of the questions that we had about Edgar's father, because it leads to Harry's law enforcement experience page, where we learn that Harry, somehow with apparently no credentials, was a member of, in his words, various federal, state, and local task forces fighting the war on drugs, including 5 years with the Rowan County ABC Police. Someone below, please tell me what the ABC Police are, because the only things I could get were cartoons for children. But the rest of his career amounts to the typical spook stuff, watching people commit crimes and instigating people to commit crimes, and then arresting them for the crimes that he instigated, just like the government does. Additionally, he also worked alongside the ATF, which is one of my least favorite 3-letter terrorist agencies. And as of the time this was written, Edgar's father was supposedly still a deputy with his county's sheriff's department. The connections, though, continue on a different page when we get a deeper look at who Harry is. Mind you, I have to leave out a lot of stuff on this guy because there is so much information he gives us. Okay, but according to his website, Harry was awarded rewarded in some wildly impressive ways. His church named him Father of the Year in 1997. He was given an invitation by the US Defense Department to go all the way to Europe and watch the joint US and German armies conduct war games. Wow. 1, what an honor to be voted best parent, and 2, what the heck are you saying? That's an absurdly niche thing to get invited to, if you can even get an invite to something like that. But keep that in mind, it's one of our first major red flags. Harry also tells us that he's been a qualified Boy Scout counselor for decades, so he's around your kids, was elected president of the North Carolina Crime Stoppers organization, has fostered 3 children and hundreds of dogs, with 30 to 50 on his property at any one time, while simultaneously teaching Sunday school for 20 consecutive years as of the early 2000s. Alongside all of this, he has been a church deacon and served 2 terms on the Boy Scouts of America Central North Carolina board. So then we should ask, what hasn't this fellow done? It's a smorgasbord of things all over the place. But above all, what really stood out to me and had my jaw dropping when I read it was the following entry on his website. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan selected me to join 15 other, quote, broadcasters to visit U.S. military installations in Colorado. We received national clearance from the U.S. Defense Department to visit the Cheyenne Mountain Nuclear Bunker, the alternate command center for NORAD. That is beyond weird and strange and suspicious in all the words. The invite to the war games is one thing on another level, but this is on another planet. Are you serious with me right now? He would be one of only a handful of non-military personnel who have been inside the complex. Heck, he's likely a part of only one of a few handfuls of non-high-ranking military officials who have been even within a couple miles of the entrance to the Cheyenne Mountain complex. I don't know if I can accurately explain how crazy of a thing this is to say and how big of a deal this would be. The Cheyenne Mountain complex is a massive bunker complex built to the side of a mountain in Colorado. I mean, this place is filled with all kinds of rumors. One of the main ones being that we don't even know how large it is or its genuine purpose, beyond, as Harry stated, a supposed alternate NORAD command center. Some suspect it's the equivalent of an underground city where covert ops run out of, and many suspect it is part of a DUMS network, which would be insanely cool to think about. DUMS being deep underground military-based systems. So all in all, this is like saying you got a free invite to Groom Lake to use their ice cream machine. Groom Lake being the military name for Area 51. So for Edgar Madison Welch's father to state that he got an invite by Ronald Reagan personally, along with 15 other, quote, broadcasters, is beyond words wild. So my next question then is, what do you mean by you're a broadcaster? Because you evidently aren't just some dude on the radio. And your portfolio also says you make movies. Yet you haven't made a film in 12 years and the last thing that you produced was a trailer for that film. However, what struck me most and really made me feel gross was this reference to Harry having served as the executive director for Protect a Child, a national nonprofit seeking to prevent the abuse and abduction of children. After which he was appointed by Governor Jim Martin to the Governor's Commission on Child Victimization. And so considering the topic we're discussing, the dad of the alleged Comet Ping Pong shooter being the executive director of an organization trying to prevent child abuse is really off-putting. And once again, something didn't sit right with me about this. The details of the org were too obscure. The name Protect a Child seemed too vague, and the description didn't give any real info. And I tried looking up Protect a Child, even backdating my searches to before the internet, and I couldn't really find anything. Funny enough, the only time that the term Protect a Child pops up as the name of an organization, for which I presume is headquartered in North Carolina, is when Harry's IMDb page pops up in the search browser. So I'm starting to think some fibs are being told here. Or really, I'm becoming more convinced that fibs are being told here. But the weirdness does continue from here on out. Harry goes on to discuss in his bio that he picked up martial arts at age 40, but wishes he had done it sooner because he went undefeated in 200 matches, winning the North Carolina State Games. 1, that's ridiculous for obvious reasons, but 2, I don't even think North Carolina has a state games. Continuing though, he has been an NRA firearms instructor for over 35 years and is rated at such a high degree that he can train others trying to become certified instructors. Harry has also taught hundreds of civilians, feds, and military in the tactical use of weapons and concealed weapons. So now this man is so good he teaches the military how to use weapons. Okay. This is the same guy that also makes the terrible films, by the way, we looked at earlier. Don't forget. And I'm not messing with you. He is also allegedly an expert firearms witness recognized as such by the Supreme Court of North Carolina. And for the lady scoopers out there, he does give self-defense classes for women, so feel free to sign up. Where, I have no idea, but feel free to do it. But if this isn't James Bond, Hardy Boys, most mysterious man in the world enough for you yet, he's also set 7 world records records in the Guinness Book of World Records. They include, but are not limited to, 715 push-ups on his fingertips, 3,821 push-ups on one arm, and 100 push-ups on one finger. Now that is exceptional considering the most one-arm push-ups isn't exactly a category. They are typically done based on time limits. For instance, there's a 1 minute limit, a 1 hour limit, and a 12-hour and a day limit. And Harry would blow these all out of the water. The data on these records is a bit hard to come by and to track down because of its relative obscurity, but the idea of someone completing 3,821 one-arm push-ups in any of these time frames is insane. That would require years of work to approach peak physique to even come close to this. Keeping this in mind though, I want to note that Harry tells us he felt loosest doing martial arts, but not when he was doing his thousands of push-ups every day training. Well, from what I can tell from the current records I found online, they don't even come close to what Harry claims to have done, so this is just an outright lie. But even more convincing is that I can't find a single record of Harry Welch Jr. ever setting one record, let alone 7. There is a 1982 record in the Guinness Book of World Records for a fellow named Paul Henry Lynch, who performed 760 one-arm push-ups. Yeah, 760 versus 3,800. Keep that in mind. So it is confirmed though that these record-setting stories are lies, which then makes me wonder what else has been fabricated here, because I also noticed that the majority of the bio is written in the third person, but at certain points it breaks into first person like Harry is writing it. And the photo of him on the site has no known repositories online, but it's also clearly clipped out of a different photo, as you can see some of the color leaking in from the background. I've edited quite a few photos, and that really stood out to me. Although at first I didn't find any known repositories of the photo online, I did research him on one of those Oznet facial recognition sites, and I got a ding for a government photo where he's sitting in front of an American flag, and then I followed that trail back to the article it supposedly came from, but the article didn't have the actual photo on there. I did, however, notice that it appears that the photo that he has edited out from might also have the same American flag behind it, so it could have been taken in the same photo session. Sorry, not trying to be super confusing, but it seems like something is going on there and there's a deeper connection. Going back to that article though that this photo supposedly came from, there is an article about the Welch family that doesn't reveal much information, but does reveal some pretty important information. That being that the Welch family is extremely wealthy. Harry was left with possibly thousands of acres of land from his dad, who owned a media company from what I can gather. And then in the 2010s, a solar company is seeking to purchase some 400 acres of Harry's land to build a roughly $70 million solar farm that is then just going to rot into the ground, poisoning the land for decades to come, which is a big concern of the people in the neighborhood and in the community who were seeking to stop this whole acquisition from happening. I don't know if they did or not, that data is unclear, but some of the comments reveal that the families around Harry and the Welch family discuss how he's living off of all of his family's money and selling it is just going to be awful for the community. So there we go. From the locals, we get a little bit of a tidbit about who this guy actually is. And it would appear that he's not very well liked for reasons that might make more sense here in a little bit. But what is clear is that he also comes from quite a bit of money, especially considering the giant chunk of cash that they're going to get from the solar company over these acres that they are purchasing. This all being said, I tried to learn more about the family, but there really isn't much. Basically, all the information on Harry and his family comes from one news organization known as the SalisburyPost.com. And there's one other known photo I was able to find of Harry, and that comes from this article that was done interviewing him. But as far as I'm aware, we have no other known information about the family. So with all these weird, seemingly unconnected bits of information, some of which is verifiably false from Harry himself, it was at this point that I seriously began to contemplate if perhaps this entire persona was just generated online by someone else and was entirely fake. And if perhaps an organization, for the sake of a cover story for someone like us, who's really just seeking more information on Edgar, and by proxy his family, generated this information to throw us off the scent. But if so, that would mean that they would have had to have created all these fake films that he's made, one of which I have the trailer for because it was never really finished, and the other of which we watched a clip from and is atrocious. So those are real, at least some of the films that he's claimed to have been on. And in addition to that, there are site archives for his webpage going pretty far back to well before the shooting. So basically it's your choice of what's real and what isn't about this man, because he evidently lies a lot if he is real. It is beyond suspicious, though, that Edgar's father has seemingly an entire falsified online presence, and he cannot be verifiably pinned down in any capacity to any work, to any travel, to any people he knows, and even his family connections online and his ancestry connections don't make much sense to me. But we do know at least someone by the name of Harry Welch does live in that region, as the Solar Farm article discusses people knowing a Harry Welch. So to that point, there is someone by that name, but dude, I'm so confused. I don't even know what to say. All of this, though, makes me think that there could possibly be some more government collusion, because this is getting weird, but I can't leave you there. The family history does go deeper, and it's something that I've yet to see discussed anywhere else either, and that is Edgar's criminal record, most of which consists of degenerate activities like drunk driving or intoxicated driving, all of which seems to slip right off of his back, and from what I can tell, it would appear he never saw the inside of a cell. That I can't attest to though, because the police are not exactly forthcoming with these records. But on October 25th of 2016, it seems things took a change for Edgar, as a guy who was typically involved in insular cases where he was the only one involved in wrecks, was arrested for running a kid over. The info here is almost zero, but we do know that Edgar struck a teenager who was walking with his friends when Edgar came in at 45 miles an hour and smacked right into him. People rushed to help this child, using shears to stop the bleeding until police arrived, who then had to use tourniquets to slow the bleeding even more, and eventually the child entered such a critical state that he had to be airlifted to a hospital. I'm unsure of what the child's fate was, but I do hope he didn't perish. That being said though, it is a pretty serious charge that Edgar has now been met with, and I'm not surprised that the mainstream media has yet to ever bring it up, as this is the sort of charge that with Edgar's DUI-riddled history could get him locked away for decades and possibly even life if the kid had passed away, meaning that he should have been at least in jail when the Comet Pizza incident took place. Or if he had good parents, completely under house arrest by them, or he would have just been in actual prison at this point. And yet none of these things can be true because, as we know, Edgar allegedly went on to enter Comet Pizza and engaged in the shooting, quote unquote. So one would have to wonder why Edgar would possibly have agreed to be the one, if he were a patsy, to participate in the staging of the Comet Ping Pong incident and the surrounding events. Edgar, as we can tell, comes from some semblance of money, doesn't seem to have worked, but always had a car and enough money to drink and travel to Haiti. And all of these serious previous charges that he was under just faded away, which really only happens with well-trained and expensive legal teams. His parents, based on his dad's profile, are connected to the government pretty deeply, although I suspect deeper than we are told, and the information online is a front for something more. They clearly have money, as we talked about, and none of them have pictures online beyond a handful to show, hey, these people are real. And so thinking of a child who was raised in a wealthy family with all these strange connections, one would expect that the only way he could really face trouble would be if he did something genuinely awful, if he messed up really, really bad. You know, like nearly murdering a kid, because that's a much harder charge to beat. So I'll admit this is speculation, but I do have to wonder if perhaps via those family connections to the state, an offer slipped down the proverbial, or maybe even literal, pneumatic tube, and it said, hey, we have this growing problem. I want you to go here, do X, Y, and Z. You just have to act crazy, and all you have to do is shoot a hard drive, then walk outside, kneel down and let the police arrest you, which happened, and then claim all you were doing was searching for the basement and for the kids. We'll give you a light sentence, which is exactly what happened. He only got 4 years, and since you served this term for the Comet Pizza incident, the charges you would have for mowing down a kid, they're gone. We wiped him away. And once you get out, as long as you remain silent, you're gonna get back to your life. And so if you ran a kid over and you got that offer, I wanna ask you genuinely, would you find it difficult to turn it down? To change a potential life sentence into only a 4-year one, and all you have to do is go and stage this incident? And I'm not saying it happened for sure, but it seems like the facts of this case are lining up pretty well to suggest that it did. And a little fact for you, the collision with the child happened on October the 25th of 2016, and the ping pong shooting happened on December 4th of 2016, so less than 6 weeks later. And the server information that this guy uncovered in the interview that we discussed earlier went public not too long after Edgar's collision. That all, though, is just a thought for you to think upon. And so now we sit in a precarious place. There clearly is a mountain of evidence to support the notion that something awry really is going on here. In fact, that was the growing sentiment in 2016 when all of a sudden the alleged shooting occurred. And it's because of this shooting that many people turned their minds off and stopped asking questions. Because obviously, if someone is going to do that and then find no children in the pizza joint, he must be crazy, right? And so the story was spun as the mainstream media does, and today that's all we have now. A crazy right-wing conspiracy theory created to make Hillary Clinton look bad, so she would then go and lose the election. Because after all, there can't be kids in the basement if there is no basement, so the whole thing must be fake. Therefore, ignoring that almost no one at the time or today who really has investigated this believes that there were kids in the basement, because there is no basement. And also, to follow the mainstream media narrative, you'd have to ignore the fact that these emails are real and were verified by both WikiLeaks and the FBI as being such. Also, I think that the argument that this was to destroy Hillary Clinton's campaign is pretty silly, because Hillary Clinton doesn't need any help looking awful, politically speaking. I mean, if I were to just choose a scandal, I would go with the Clinton list. Anyway, besides the point, but not really, because there is something even deeper with these emails and files. Because what could possibly be worth hiring a troubled man to go and conduct this Comet Pizza shooting over? In my mind, the information already provided is enough, but there is another rabbit hole to fall down, and that is DynCorp. Cooper, what on earth is DynCorp? Great question. You know how when you were born, you were completely dependent on your mother and father? Or perhaps if you're a Reddit mod, you still are and can relate to that? Well, that's what DynCorp is. A really really fat baby, whose mom and dad is the federal government. And this proverbial parent has an addiction, worse than crack or fent. It's called global destruction. DynCorp is a quote-unquote independent military and services contractor to the United States federal government. It raked in $3 billion last year in revenue, 96% of which came from the federal government. And that is basically what they've done for some 50-odd years, sucked the teat of the American taxpayer dry, producing overpriced tech services and sending contractors around the globe. And it's these contractors we really care about. So enter the following: a wire referencing communications with the Afghan Minister of the Interior, Hanif Atmar, who has been for many years one of the preeminent figures in that region. And the wire reads as follows. Summary: Assistant Ambassador Musemli discussed a range of issues with Minister of Interior MOI Hanif Atmar on June 23rd on the Kunduz Regional Training Center RTC DynCorp event of April the 11th, RefTel. Atmar reiterated his insistence that the US try to quash any news article on the incident or circulation of a video connected with it. He continued to predict that publicity would endanger lives. He disclosed that he has arrested 2 Afghan police and 9 other Afghans as part of an MOI investigation into Afghans who facilitated this crime of, quote, purchasing a service from a child, end quote. He pressed for CSTCA to be given full control over the police training program, including contractors. Musamli counseled that an overreaction by the Afghan government would only increase chances for the greater publicity the MOI is trying to forestall. Now, I brought up this one as it is a second portion to an original message that we will look at in a second. This one, however, dropped in 2009 and made some waves as we have a foreign leader asking the American government to quell a story in the American media, something that, based on how the nation allegedly operates, shouldn't occur. Obviously, though, we cannot ignore the clear reference to children, but this wouldn't all connect for us until 2016 with the Podesta email leak. People pretty quickly connected these two things for what they obviously were: suspicious communications about children, although this one is admittedly more obvious than the Podesta emails, as it references directly the purchasing of services from a child. Alright, so now we're at an awkward impasse. What kind of services could possibly be getting referenced right here? And it's a big deal that the Minister of the Interior is already chomping at the bit to cover up the events of this April 11th party by arresting and interrogating a bunch of people and asking for the American government to rein these cretin contractors in that were involved. After all, despite being in part 2 of this series, there is no way that there is an email that directly tells us that government operatives are engaged in the exact activities that we've been speculating, because that would be insane. And you'd be wrong. It is exactly what we think it is. The whole message is worth a read. That, however, is the response. I think there is an even more clear email that is worth reading. It's a little bit longer, so bear with me. This is from Cheryl Mills to Hillary Clinton. The date is 6/3 of 2009, and the subject is DynCorp's post story, second shoe to drop, all caps. Folks, you may recall an April 17th post story on problems with DynCorp in Afghanistan, which focused on a suspected drug overdose death. That overdose was likely not an overdose, if you're catching my drift. The other issue that surfaced at the time was a colossal error in judgment by one of the contractor's employees in hiring an adolescent boy dancer for some sort of event that, at least to most folks, looked very inappropriate. The post is now looking at the dancing boy, which was not included in the April 17th article, and we expect we'll soon publish a story on it. The post inquiry at this point focuses only on confirming whether or not there is an OIG investigation. We are of course referring the post to the OIG on such a question. However, the premise for the question raises the issue again in some eye-popping rhetoric which could feature in the follow-up story, so I want to make sure everyone had a heads up. We've already relieved the folks involved with both incidents, and I am meeting with the firm's CEO today to hear his reports on his trip to Afghanistan and Iraq to address these, as well as other issues on which we have demanded corrective actions. According to my report, the week of April 13th, the DynCorp regional commander from Kunduz, Flint Chambers, allowed his men to hire a 15-year-old boy dancer to do tribal dances at a DynCorp party on the training site. Some 15 or so DynCorp employees in attendance pulled out a single chair and had the boy do mock lap dances. This was captured on video. The video shows DynCorp employees putting dollar bills in the boy's waistband, just as they would a stripper's garter. The revelry lasted about 45 minutes. The email later goes on to say that no took place. 3 of the people involved were fired, but we got about nothing else of interest in this. What is interesting, though, is that in no regard could you call this a tribal dance, while in the same exact email stating that they pulled out his chair and treated him like a stripper. And that would be because most are unaware of what exactly an Afghanistan dancing boy is. Not to mention that they're just totally lying to try and cover their butts, but that's a separate story. It should be noted that although they are trying to cover it up, they do make it clear that there is some pretty heinous stuff going on in the email. But they leave out a lot of details, especially about what exactly the dancing boy is. To the best of my knowledge, the original video of what happened, although clearly being referenced and saying that it was leaked, cannot be found anywhere online. That should just be a testament to the amount of absolute tomfoolery that's going on here. But nonetheless, there is a PBS documentary that goes into just how dark this practice is, which I played some clips from on screen. But it's very clear that this is not just a tribal dance. It's an incredibly dark and devilish sexual act that's being engaged in here. But to set the record straight, when you hear the term dancing boys or bakibazi, you should think little boy hookers made to dance in confined areas surrounded by disgusting males who grab the boys sexually while they gyrate around the space, engaging in sexual dancing dressed as little girls, and during the process, the watchers will slip money into their underwear or throw money at them. Typically, there's also a progression of getting more and more naked. It is utterly vile. And this specific dancing boy incident, as we know, went on for 45 minutes based on the own testimony of these government officials before the boy was taken away. Now, I find it humorous in the darkest way possible that the email references that no sex took place. Well, first of all, it wouldn't be sex, it'd be rape. Second of all, this is a child and no sex didn't take place there, but anyone who's looked into the dancing boy phenomena even for the slightest bit, and even those who haven't, can probably imagine what happens to a boy like this afterwards. But I'm going to specify just so we know for sure. Once again, this information comes from a massive documentary that went to Afghanistan and interviewed dancing boys and their families and the people who buy them. And what we learned is that after a dancing boy finishes his routine, he would then be auctioned off to the highest bidder for a night or many nights, really however long said individual can afford. And once that person has purchased the child, basically becomes their property for an extended period of time, however long they choose. And I'm assuming you can guess, but we will state emphatically once again, what happens during this time is violent rape of these little boys, and is testified to both by the dancing boys, their parents, and the people who purchase them. If one of these boys tries to escape, they're fortunate if they end up even remotely alive. Most commonly, they will end up dead, as they've committed a crime in the eyes of the people who bought them. And unsurprisingly, these events are common across the entirety of Afghanistan. The government is fully aware of them and are attended to by, you guessed it, the wealthy and powerful in that region. So we now have one Afghani political official asking another American political official to help cover up his child rape ring, and this other official is also accused of being involved in the same ilk of activities. Got it. And we do know the government did cover this up, along with the Afghan Minister of the Interior, as I imagine the majority of you listening to this now have never before even heard of the dancing boy situation. And as we stated, the video cannot be found, so some degree of cover-up has occurred. But the real question is then, why is Hillary getting emailed personally about this by one of her most prominent attorneys? She's meant to be biased in the interests of America and its people as Secretary of State, not in foreign countries. But clearly, her emails and those related to her suggest that something deeper is at play, that perhaps this ring in Afghanistan isn't so isolated to Afghanistan. And its contractors are not just up to no good in that neighborhood, but are up to no good in many neighborhoods. In fact, issues with DynCorp specifically can be found in Hillary's emails going as far back as at least January 1st of 2001, when DynCorp was caught once again in a, quote, continuing pattern of allegations, meaning these nefarious acts were happening in the 1990s and possibly even before. In fact, we are very certain they were happening before, because as we will find out, this Afghan situation, and likely DynCorp as a whole, is just a wheel in a much larger machine based on these activities, because the locals of countries aren't reported as only having issues with DynCorp in the Middle East. Indeed, DynCorp has a rap sheet that would make Dahmer blush. For instance, in Ukraine, Russia, Moldova. In fact, you know what? You just pick an Eastern European country. DynCorp has likely been there and had problems, especially in those two countries I listed. DynCorp and its contractors are reported by hundreds of eyewitnesses and citizens who just want the best for their people, as abducting their children, establishing trafficking rings, and raping children, among many other things. One major incident is in war-torn Bosnia, where DynCorp employees were accused of raping, purchasing, and selling children, most often girls as young as 12, at least. And this became a major incident in Bosnia with a ton of public reaction and anger, but it seems to have mysteriously, or perhaps not so mysteriously, fallen short of the ears of the American mainstream media. Darn, such a shame, right? I wonder how that happened. And these employees and contractors were there to take care of planes. So in theory, just worth adding, convenient and direct access to a way of transporting children internationally. And we know that DynCorp has had a history of transporting heroin and other drugs internationally, but that's an aside. But child trafficking is something that they have been accused of many times, as we've stated. But I digress. Considering then that this is all pretty public information, one should ask what happened to these contractors who were seen accused and have literal evidence, even videos, of being engaged in these acts with children. Were they arrested, tossed in a gulag, perhaps strapped to a few car batteries and a pasta strainer for a hat? No, not at all. Most of them just got sent back to the States, continued their careers, and likely got some cushy executive jobs. Some were arrested, but their sentences are pretty obscure if they ever got one. And it makes sense that many of these guys actually got promoted, since you can't have an at least 3-decade-long problem with this sort of activity without some degree of company support. A company, mind you, that is 100% dependent on your money and my money. But it doesn't stop there. One may argue that DynCorp, which Hillary appears to be covering directly for, may not have been aware of these issues until then. Well, as stated, that's not true, as they've had a long history of such issues and have been visited before, but in these emails we see Hillary's top attorney discussing going to visit DynCorp's CEO to discuss these accusations and the problems that keep happening with their company. Although I wager that the problem in the government's eyes was not that they were doing such things, but more so that the problem got out to the public. In fact, there is another incident with DynCorp that would suggest that in Bosnia, where an employee named Ben Johnson uncovered a slavery ring being run by his fellow DynCorp employees, and guess what happened to him? He was fired and sent back to the States. But in case we didn't think these DynCorp folks were international enough, they are accused of these same exact actions in Colombia. And if this were a DynCorp video, I wouldn't stop there, we would keep going. Because the list does continue, and yes, the company is still active today. And even though Hillary is no longer in office, it certainly appears to have the exact same protections because no one is suffering the consequences of this behavior. And this is the same company that Hillary's top attorney made sure to alert her of when the dancing boy news broke, and that the Afghan Minister of the Interior wanted her to cover up. And this same minister then went and arrested people in the police force who knew of the issue, not who had participated in it. So then I gotta ask you a question. Can it get more obvious than this? And as you'll see in episode 3, the answer is yes. Thank you so much, you guys, for watching this video. It really does mean a lot. And for you guys who made it all the way to the end, comment DynCorp is sus. If you made it this far, we'll confuse everyone else. I just want to say thank you again, though, for everyone who's been here and support the channel. Special shout out to everyone on the Patreon, like Paul, the Prince of Patreon. You know, appreciate you. But I appreciate every single one of you guys, whether it's a view, a like, a sub, a donation. It means the world to me, so thank you. And I want to also say a special thank you to everybody, because we just hit 100,000 subscribers. What? I looked at it. This last September, I was talking about how I just hit 1,000 subscribers. Now we've hit 100,000. God is good. So thank you to every single one of you, and hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. I am gonna have to cliffhanger you there. I actually have episode 2 written already for this one, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this. It's been a crazy deep dive to make, but I could tell the Oklahoma City video, it just didn't seem like as many people were interested, so I'm happy to go back to that if you guys would like me to. But I thought this might be a more interesting and happening topic, especially with all of the Epstein stuff, and I think we might have overlooked some things here related to the gate. So I just wanted to give this a try and see how it goes. I hope you guys like it though. Also growing the mustache, so you'll get to see that progress through the outro. Never had a mustache, I've already been made fun of, and I got a bad haircut, guys. It's been a rough hair week. Seriously though, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your guys' support so much. Thank you for the Patreon supporters. Paul, you know who you are. And everyone out there, it means the world. I'm gonna be getting more stuff out there here in the next few weeks, and then for all the channel members, thank you. It's a whole process, you guys, and I'm really grateful to have you guys here along the way. We're almost at 100K, and I'm just so excited. Thank you guys for being awesome. Hope you guys really enjoy this series. That being said, I love life, and I can't wait to see each and every one of you in the next one. Like and subscribe, check out the Instagram. Now let's dive.